Welcome to About Women for Women with Dr. Kamila. How to find balance and joy in perimenopause and beyond. We bring together psychology and biology, spirituality and science, personal stories and professional insights for the benefit of all. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Welcome again, Emily. Really great to have you here. First question. So, these days, anyone that is opening Instagram or Facebook or any other kind of social media platform is flooded with different perimenopause and menopause advice. What worries you the most about what women are being told online nowadays?
There are two things. The absolute barrage of misinformation, right? And the oversimplification of symptoms and things going on in the body. And this magic bullet, like buy this product and it will help all of your symptoms. And all of these products that I've seen, that beef liver is huge right now on the market, like, oh, if you just eat this beef liver or caribou liver, it's going to nourish your body and it's going to fix all of your symptoms. And it's good, it's not a bad thing to nourish our bodies, but it's missing the mark. So I'm afraid that women are getting misled down paths that aren't necessarily going to get to the root of the problem, because all of these things can help, but it's not really root cause targeting.
And also, even if you have, good nutrition and take supplements and everything else, if your gut is not working well, then you won't
Right.
digest it, you won't absorb it, so you won't benefit from it. So just supplement itself is not going to solve it.
Yes. Yeah, it has to be very personal and very targeted to where your issues are.
Yes. Okay. So many women walk into your practice frightened. And that usually happens because the only menopause and perimenopause concept they have in their mind is based on how their mom have been experiencing this, or how some aunties or any other women that they have witnessed going through perimenopause. So they often may be scared because, our mothers didn't have as much access to good support, maybe the HRT, or maybe even the knowledge of how to support body nutritionally. So when such a woman is frightened and comes into your office, what do you say to that woman who is convinced that the story will be the same?
Well, it's the same that I tell everyone with no matter what condition they're struggling with, men or women. Your family history doesn't dictate what your personal history has to be. That there's a big misconception between, genetics, like people come in and I'll just throw their hands up. I don't know what I'm going to do because my mother had this thyroid thing, or my mother had terrible menopause, symptoms and issues. So I'm just afraid that this is, like you said, this is going to be me. And so I always tell people there's a big difference between genetics, like we're talking chromosomes and big genetics, versus what's just deficiencies. Like let's talk about just basic nutrition, because if your mother didn't have enough iodine to make her thyroid work when she was pregnant with you, well, yeah, baby's not going to have enough iodine to make a good working thyroid. So that's not necessarily a genetic problem. That's just a deficiency problem. And everything in your life, when we talk about variants, you may have that MTHFR variant, you may have COMT. There's different big hitters in the genetic variant realm right now that are being really talked about. But the whole thing is, with those variants, your diet and lifestyle influence how those express. So you absolutely have the power to make your story better. You don't have to suffer the way that your mom did, or the way you might have seen a family member suffer.
And, in the last 20 years, the power of epigenetics have been really emphasized. So let's say even 40 years ago, 50 years ago, or even 30 years ago, we were thinking that genes dictate your future. That there is this kind of saying that I could hear from my clients, and you probably as well, like, oh, it just runs in the family. But actually, we know that epigenetics is everything that is above the gene. Epi means above. So everything that is influencing whether certain genes switch on or switch off is the environment in which those genes operate. So the food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe, the amount of toxin we expose our bodies on, the amount of stress from internal experience. So certain genes will be switched on, switched off. So how your mom has coped with stress or how she went through perimenopause will also be dictated by her lifestyle, her diet.
Correct.
Any specific like tips for women or recommendations, or if someone would like to pick up on this subject, on kind of like your mom's history is not your destiny kind of thing? Because one comes to my mind and I wanted to share it, but I want to ask you first if there is anything. I just remembered this book that I read years ago when I was doing my functional medicine training. Do you know Ben Lynch and the Dirty Genes book?
Oh, yes, yes.
He recommends doing the special assessment. It's like a questionnaire, very long, detailed questionnaire of different symptoms. Based on this questionnaire, the answers, he can identify which genes are most likely dirtied. And then, so you do the one questionnaire at the beginning, then he recommends doing like a 2-week detox, kind of like a scrub to do certain things, and so that the real problems come to surface. Take the test again after 2 weeks, and then you identify more clearly and with more certainty which are the real problems within for you in your kind of build up. Then he has chapters dedicated to each particular, like COMT, MTHFR, different kind of genetic makeups, in terms of what kind of nutrition to, what kind of foods to include, what kind of foods to avoid, what type of exercise. So that's one book that I recommend my clients in general, not just perimenopausal women, because it's not specifically focused on perimenopause, but it really helps to kind of adjust the diet if you don't want to spend a few £100 on genetic tests. This book is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, women just really need to focus on educating themselves. I feel like in your later years of schooling before you go to college, one of the classes that we should be taking is a really in-depth anatomy and physiology class so that you know better how your body works, but not a regular class like a functional anatomy class, like we need to know functionally how your digestive tract should work and the changes that are going to happen in your body and what drives them. The more you know, the more empowered you feel and the more calm you feel about life.
Another book just came to my mind. Another book that also talks about those different predispositions that we may have, which I also found fascinating. And I know it's a bit off topic from perimenopause, but mental health, and we will talk about it in another episode, mental health is kind of like can become a problem for many perimenopausal women.
Sure.
That more of them are diagnosed with anxiety and depression and so on. And there is one particular author, I think he's a psychiatrist from America. He's called Dr. Daniel Amen. And I remember reading You Happier, where he describes, I think, 9 different types of brain. Basically, he says that there is no such a thing as mental health disorders. He basically says that everything is due to the fact that the brain may be malnourished, underoxygenated, and I think there are a few other categories, but basically he gives different protocols, a bit like Ben Lynch for genetic
Sure.
what kind of diet, what type of exercise to kind of slow down like reabsorption of dopamine. I find it fascinating.
It's funny that you should mention that because I actually have a friend who just went down to, I believe he's the doctor that owns the Amen clinics around the nation. And she took her children, and it was an expensive process. It was like close to 5,000 US
Yes.
dollars per person. But he took them all in and did a specialized brain scan of all of them. And it's actually being used in court for protective parents to protect their children better from the other parent who is the perpetrating parent because it's measurable. Trauma is measurable in the brain. So it's absolutely an amazing. And yeah, I love that he is so holistic. He's like, we have to address diet. We have to get the inflammation out. The way to get inflammation out is to help your gut because that reflects how much inflammation is going on in your brain. Like all of the things. He's fantastic.
Like even if perimenopause is very hot topic at the moment, mental health and how to optimize nutrition and help certain genes switch on and switch off can be applicable at any age, not necessarily just
Right. Yep,
yeah.
absolutely.
Let's go back to basics. Many women were never taught at school or even by our doctors about perimenopause. And in a simple language, what is actually happening inside woman's body during perimenopause? What is really behind those hot flushes and broken sleep and anxiety? If you can kind of explain it from the functional medicine point of view, from nutritional point of view, like what is your simple explanation when women come to you and you want to educate them, help them understand, probably you do that at the beginning so that everything else you do makes more sense.
Yep, absolutely. So our bodies are designed to propagate the species. So when we start cycling, all like when women hit puberty, the hormones, all of those steroid hormones, all of our sex hormones, they act as a buffer for anything else that's going on in the body. Now, sometimes those things are so tremendous, like if you have a major autoimmune issue, like the sex hormones won't cover that. But for just an average, fairly well-nourished person, if you have some little bit of food intolerance, or if you have a little bit of a sluggish thyroid, the sex hormones that power up with your cycle starting will help to act as a buffer to keep everything functioning really well in order to make babies. That's the whole biological drive behind this process. And as we go through our childbearing years, so many of these, like we just don't even notice that there's any issues at all because the sex hormones do such a great job of buffering those problems. So when we hit that perimenopause time, when we initially start to notice, oh, the ovaries are starting to power down, they're not kicking out quite as robust of amounts of hormones. We start to notice, oh, I'm starting to I notice that this food is bothering me. I've never had a food allergy to this particular food, and it's starting to bother me now. Or gosh, it's harder to lose weight. It's harder, like things are changing. My, metabolism is changing. That perimenopause time is an unmasking. When those beautiful sex hormones start to drop, then we start to really fully understand like the issues that have been there all this time. So that's why we start to get those other symptoms. If things are working, if everything is working properly, it should be a very seamless and smooth transition. So that perimenopause really is, women come so frustrated, oh, this change is just so awful. It's really not awful. This is a beautiful opportunity for you to understand better what's going on with your body, and let's get this fixed before it becomes a bigger problem.
I say exactly the same to women I work with when they come, or sometimes they come before perimenopause, because I also work with women in their 20s or early
Mhm.
30s. And I tell them that, like the better, the more balanced is their nervous system, and the more balanced is their body in general, the healthier they are, the more smooth will be the perimenopause ride.
Mhm.
So, like their body will cope better because, like I say that perimenopause doesn't create problems. It just kind of uncovers things that were there,
Yes.
covered by all the kind of nice cushion of estrogen,
Mhm.
being progesterone levels being high. And, like we can cope with more because we have this cushioning. And also we have more drive with higher levels of testosterone as well. And then when the
Right.
testosterone is dropping, we kind of like lose the oomph a bit.
Mhm.
Any kind of recommendations, anything that you do to help them understand it better,
I always tell women that our bodies are made for change. Women's bodies in particular, women's, our hormones are so much more complicated than men's, but we're designed for change. We start as children and we grow a little bit and then we start cycling. And then we go through years of, cycling and making babies. And then we go through another transition where we don't have, where we're not cycling anymore. All of these things, our body is made for it. So it's, take a breath. It's okay. We have this, our bodies know what to do. But the very best thing that women can do is nourish their adrenals, because as your ovaries start to power down in perimenopause, your adrenals should help kick in to help produce those sex hormones. And so many women arrive at perimenopause or menopause, and they're at this time of their life where this should be an absolutely amazing transition, where the responsibilities are changing. If they've had children, those children are grown now. These women can go back to focusing on what they love, or they're, want to go back to their careers or do other things or pursue other interests. And so often women hit this time and they are just exhausted and angry and tired and frustrated. And, they've been giving for far too long, or, there's been an imbalance in work and home, responsibilities, and they're just tired. They reach this point and they're already burnt out. And so the symptoms are far worse than what they need to be because those adrenals are so exhausted already. So nourish those adrenals, take care of those adrenals.
Maybe it is worth pointing out that the reason why we want to nourish the adrenals is because the sex hormones are made from the same precursor. So if the body has to choose between dealing with stress, which is means producing cortisol to deal with that,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
sex hormones, the body will prioritize safety, which is like, okay, let's deal with stress.
Right. Yep.
Pregnenolone is the precursor for all those sex hormones later on, and you can either make cortisol or pregnenolone.
I've heard it both ways. I've heard pregnenolone steal or cortisol steal. That's the interruption and this, like you said, this pathway that it has to choose what am I going to deal with. So,
And so when I work with people, I explain to them the importance of doing some kind of stress reduction, the importance of finding time to just have time for yourself or have a space in the house that will be just dedicated to your sanctuary where you can replenish, you can kind of
mhm.
like recharge and have those times where you don't give, but you pour inside yourself because you cannot pour from empty cups. You have to fill in your cup. So I think
Yep.
this is from the physiology point of view we talked about, but from psychology point of view, it's important that we invest and prioritize our needs as women because we tend to give so much everywhere that if
Yes.
we don't nourish ourselves and our needs, then there comes a point, specifically in perimenopause, where there is just like we're running on empty and we cannot pour from empty cup. So
Right. That's exactly right. And not only that, but people need to understand, both men and women, how catabolic cortisol is, right? Different hormones have, unintended repercussions, and cortisol is breaking down. It's when you constantly have, in the short term, like people get kind of confused when I tell them about this because there's, oh, well, if you have joint pain, if you have a tear or something crazy, your doctor can give you cortisol injections and it will help for a certain amount of time, and I always explain, well, it does in the short term, in a very short, small burst. Cortisol can do good things for the body, but when it is chronic, everyday stress, that cortisol actually has a catabolic effect. It tears down, it breaks down your tissue. So you don't want your system flooded with cortisol every single day. You've got to have that reprieve from the stress and let your body recover.
So we can kind of refer here to the other episode, the previous episode we recorded about the invisible load, the mental load that women are dealing
Yes,
with, which actually drives this high cortisol, this very prolonged cortisol production, which is not natural, or it shouldn't be like this. So if you're interested
right.
in the subject, please watch the other episode.
Yeah, it truly is a double-edged sword because you not only are getting that pregnenolone steal, that cortisol steal, where your body is, okay, now choosing to produce cortisol instead of sex hormones, but that cortisol is also tearing down your tissue. So in addition to being deficient with all of these sex hormones, you're also getting your tissue broken down even further. So yeah, it's very important.
So the next question. As the ovaries slowly power down and the adrenals are meant to step in and help, as you just explained, why is that handover so important? And what happens to a woman who arrives at this stage with her adrenals already exhausted from years of stress? So, what are the worst consequences of that?
So those are the women that I see that have the worst menopausal symptoms. The hot flashes, the night sweats, the insomnia, I can't sleep, the stress, the vaginal dryness, the low libido, all of these things, the histamine response, the higher histamine levels, the stubborn weight gain, especially belly fat, they just can't get rid of.
The anxiety and ADHD, I would add.
Yes. Yes, yes, absolutely. All of those things are just exacerbated, right? Because that's what progesterone does. It calms everything down. It makes a very nice environment for a baby to grow, which feels really good to us as well. It keeps everything calm. It drives the thyroid. It helps the histamine response. It helps you sleep, all of those things. So I always tell people it's kind of like if you've ever babysat a toddler, when you let them go too far past nap time,
Oh,
everything is a meltdown, right? Everything. I mean, and I find that even as myself, like as an adult, on days when I've really had to push it hard, I get to the end of the day and I'm just, I'm like, I just want to cry like a baby. Why? And I look at the clock. Oh, because it's almost midnight and I should go to bed. Like the lack of sleep always makes everything worse. And whatever I'm struggling with after a good night's rest, oh, it always looks better in the morning. And our adrenals are the same way. If our adrenals are exhausted because they haven't had enough rest or they've been pushed too hard, all of those symptoms that they should be helping to transition smoothly in menopause and perimenopause is not going to be a smooth transition. It's going to be throwing a tantrum like a toddler without sleep, right? And that's our bodies feel it. And so we have those really raging symptoms of perimenopause and menopause.
so where this kind of conversation comes up in my consultation is where if women come to me with anger problems, and often I tell them that your anger problem is not actually anger problem, it may be a sugar balance problems, or it's not anger problem, but you are so exhausted that you are just frustrated and snappy, because that's just like a natural basic instinct that kicks in. We just need so much sleep that this is the priority, and the body just does get out of my way. I just want sleep.
Mhm,
When we go a bit too far in that tiredness, we as women feel too tired to sleep. We are tired beyond measure, but
mhm,
because the nervous system is still rattling, still kind of stimulated. And even though we are so tired, we just dream of like falling asleep like a stone. So the more stress you get, the more symptoms and the more severe your symptoms of perimenopause will be.
yep.
Okay, right. So the next question. So many practitioners, you and me included, describe perimenopause as this unmasking, and we just talked about that. So what exactly is being unmasked by the arrival of perimenopause? You talked about imbalances in the body and so on, but can you give some examples, and maybe just even one example and some remedies? Like, what are the typical problems that women come with that, the perimenopause unmasked, and then what do you focus on with your work with them?
So, for example, a lot of women hit, that 40-year-old range or so, and oh my gosh, all of a sudden they're having thyroid issues. And I tell them, yeah, progesterone drives thyroid function. So if your thyroid was a little bit slow for whatever reason, all of these years, maybe it was a lack of iodine or, for whatever reason, your thyroid is just a little bit sluggish, but you were cycling and had this really robust output of progesterone. Our systems we have kind of some redundancy in our systems, right? So iodine helps to drive your thyroid, but also progesterone. So if you didn't have quite enough iodine to make your thyroid function properly, well, that progesterone was there to help drive it. So everything was fine. But now that you've hit perimenopause and that progesterone is slowly starting to lower, then your thyroid is like, oh, hey, I need help, So I always tell women there's, these things, everything is like that. Our progesterone really mitigates histamine responses. So if you have a chronic allergen that you're always exposed to, whether it's environmental or within something in your food, that robust output of progesterone, you feel pretty good. You don't really notice it. So the first place we always start is the gut. We always start with the gut because so many of our issues come back to that. Your thyroid won't function well if your liver is congested and not working well with your digestive tract. So we have to make sure that the liver is clean and functioning well. We have to make sure that your mucosal barrier in your gut is intact and everything is really good so that you don't have a big histamine flare up all the time with all the food that you're eating. There's enough, your body has enough to deal with just with metabolizing your own used up hormones, on top of, dealing with whatever you're putting in your mouth as well. So really focusing on diet and gut health is where it has to start and is key because if you have an inflamed gut, I can give you supplements all day long, but it's just going to be a waste of money because you won't absorb what you should be, right? And that's that, women already are coming, not only burnt out and tired and, confused, but also they've already spent a lot of money on supplements that haven't worked, or, went chasing down rabbit holes that, nothing came to fruition.
For me, from the psychology point of view, and from the point of view of the kinds of women that come to see me, the thing that I most often focus on is blood sugar regulation. In my opinion, and that was also my personal experience, what perimenopause or the reducing levels of hormones unmasked in my body, and I think it's unmasking in many women's bodies, is blood sugar regulation problems and insulin resistance, because as
Sure.
the insulin is dropping, the body is finding it harder to deal with the higher level of sugar, and then the body gets numb to the insulin that is being produced, and insulin resistance develops. And because of that, other problems women are experiencing, which are not necessarily perimenopause, but they may, like in the past, women would have polycystic ovarian syndrome. Now, a few months ago, this name has been changed from polycystic ovarian syndrome to polysystem metabolic syndrome. It's all to do with the insulin function in the body. That, from the psychologist perspective point of view, that can drive, well, not just the obvious, like you will be putting on weight, you will have problems with self-esteem and maybe, self-acceptance and so on, but also it may cause anxiety, because if your blood sugar is dysregulated, you may be more worried, you may have panic attacks, you may sleep not as well as before. You may be waking up in the middle of the night startled, if your blood sugar goes too low
Sure.
so for me as a psychologist, that is something I see a lot and I address a lot. Next one. So we agree on one myth, and that myth simply refuses to die. Basically, that hormones or HRT in general causes cancer. So can you set the record straight for our listeners once and for all?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked this question, because it's only been recently, I think within the last year, that the black box warning label has come off the bioidentical hormones. And it turns out that the problem that, I mean, hormone replacement therapy can cause cancer, but it is not the bioidentical hormones that are the problem. Women were being prescribed these really inflammatory progestins, which is a synthetic progesterone that is not usable to our body really, and causes a lot of inflammation and congestion on the inside. So
Horse's urine. This is
yes. Yes. So yeah, there's yeah, there's all kinds of issues. But essentially they have finally acknowledged that through all of the studies that were done, the problems that the women that developed cancer was a result of the progestins. So when we and isn't that true with anything? If we put anything in our body that is synthetic, babies are given in America. I don't know what it's like in the UK or in Europe, but when babies are born in hospitals, they really push a vitamin K shot. That vitamin K shot is a synthetic form of vitamin K that is not usable to their bodies. So not only did you just inject them with something that they can't use, but you've now broken the skin and created, an opportunity for infection. So, I mean, it really is a very poor way to do that. They have vitamin K drops that they can give an infant if there's truly a concern for blood clotting or, whatever issue. But that is a bioavailable form of vitamin K and can be used, so why are we doing this? Why are we doing this to our babies, and why are we doing this to ourselves, right? Why would we put this progestin into our body that is just going to create inflammation? And it's so amazing. I've had two clients in the last just like couple of weeks come to me, and they want to address these hormone issues. And I'm okay, so as I'm taking down their health history, what are you on? And they tell me what they're on. I'm like, oh, that's that progestin. You've got to get off of that. Why would your doctor, recommend that? Oh, well, they did because I was having this uncontrollable cramping and spotting throughout the month. And so this did help it. And I said, yes, but you got on it. And then you started to gain weight almost immediately. And, all of these things started to happen in your body. those are a result of your body trying to deal with all of this new inflammation that you're creating with this. And so I switched them over to a progesterone, a bioidentical progesterone cream in place of the progestin. And almost instantly they feel better. Oh, I'm still not having cramping, so that was a good change, like there's that smooth transition there. But they tell me I am sleeping better. And my husband is looking very attractive to me lately. And, like all of these good changes start to happen. And it results from this is what happens when you take away the inflammation. You can't be orally ingesting, this very pro-inflammatory, thing and think that our bodies are going to deal well with that. So bioidentical hormones are a beautiful, help for women who are really struggling. But I also tell them a really key thing. A doctor that I work with, that I trained with, always says it takes more than hormones to fix your hormones. So even if you have a good doctor who is recommending bioidentical hormones, that's wonderful. But don't just be content with a doctor throwing hormones at you to fix your problems. We always want to support the body's natural processes as much as possible, and then just top off with hormones. If you've changed your diet, your lifestyle, you're getting better sleep, you're unloading your stress, you're handling things better, those are all wonderful changes. And well, actually, you might be surprised at how well your own body transitions into, kicking into that adrenal supported sex hormone production. You'd be surprised at how well our bodies can actually function when we remove the extra sugar, when we get the blood sugar under control, when we are truly nourishing and getting our diets, in line. Our bodies are really good at doing what they do. And then you just top off with hormones to make it completely optimal. So that would be the best scenario for women.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And I have my private theory. It can be quite controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway, that the reason behind the system is offering those synthetic hormones and so on, it's money, it's the profit of the big pharmaceutical companies. Because surprise, surprise, since 2000, when the big Women Health Initiative study was published and the results were misinterpreted and scared the shit out of doctors and women
Everybody,
across
yes.
the world from hormone replacement therapy, the prescription rates for antidepressants skyrocketed. The prescription rates for statin skyrocketed. The amount of Alzheimer diagnosis skyrocketed. And what? 70% of diagnosed cases are women. Like the amount of bone loss and frailty, and like it's scary. It's scary to see it. I mean, I see it. For me, it's obvious, but this is my personal opinion. This is not officially established fact. But if you check what are the prescription rates, they really did skyrocketed in the last 25 years.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so for a woman that is listening right now and who thinks that she just has to grit her teeth and suffer through perimenopause and menopause, what can changing her diet and lifestyle actually do for her symptoms?
So I think in the last podcast, or maybe in a different other talk that we had, I mentioned that our bodies are like waterfalls, and one change upstream will affect everything else downstream. So the minute you start to change your diet and lifestyle for the better, it will start to have a cascade effect on all the rest of your symptoms. It is that simple. It's hard to imagine when you're in the worst, scenario in your body and mind and not feeling good. It feels almost impossible to pull out of, but literally the minute you stop putting that sugar in your system, the minute you start exercising, the minute you get some regularity to your nervous system, you're going to see good effects and things will start to change. Our bodies are made for change, and they're also made for healing themselves. So it is possible. Menopause is mandatory. We'll all go through it, whether surgically or through natural, aging process. We all go through menopause. Menopause is mandatory. Suffering is optional. You have the power to change the outcome of your experience in menopause.
Is there any, like, if you were to suggest one change that can have a massive effect down the stream on that kind of waterfall, like something that, in your opinion, would have the biggest impact on, the symptoms a woman can have or reducing those symptoms, what would that be?
Removing sugar. You know, that's not to say that you can't go to, a wedding or a girls' night out or whatever and enjoy a piece of cake or whatever, enjoy a treat once in a while, but we are getting pummeled with way too many sugary foods. And that will contribute to the insulin resistance. It's going to drive inflammation. It's going to create food allergies because if you eat inflammatory sugar with other foods, your body is going to think, oh, these other foods are also the problem, and it will create more food allergies. It does all kinds of things in our body if we can eliminate wrinkles, bags under your eyes, everything. If you remove the sugar for the most part from daily consumption, it will allow your body's natural metabolism to take back over. And sometimes it's a very slow process. If you spent decades eating a very high sugar or high carb diet, it's going to take a while for your body to make that transition, but it is so worth it.
Fantastic. What would be the thing that you would like a woman listening to this podcast to walk away with? Like one piece of information they are to take away from this whole discussion. What would that be?
I always tell women drive the function of the whole world. You know, we often say things like they are the heartbeat of the home. They keep everything running behind the scenes. We talked last episode about the invisible work, all of the behind the scenes work that women do. You drive so much of your family life, of your relationships. You do so much for everyone else. You are worthwhile. You are worthy of taking the time to nourish yourself. It is okay to become self-centered for a while and refocus your energy to pull everything in your life back together so that you can pour from a very full cup.
Absolutely. I agree with this wholeheartedly. So, Emily, thank you so much for today's episode. I cannot wait for the next time we meet and record another one. So, guys, if you enjoyed this episode and if you know any woman who may benefit from hearing this particular conversation, please send it to her. Please share it. Please share it with your girlfriends. And if you would like to work specifically with either Emily or myself, in-depth way, more personalized way, then under this episode, you will find our contact details. And next time, I don't know whether it will be next time or in 2 times from now, we will talk more about all the kind of consequences for women when there's too much stress, when the body decides to say no, and all the autoimmunity problems, the thyroid conditions, the Alzheimer's, and basically the cost of keeping certain things silent. So that will be another topic. So stay tuned. And then another one that we have planned for you as well is all things to do with sex and the myths around that and what happens around perimenopause and what happens in relationship and in marriage, how we see ourselves as women, because that is changing massively in the 40s and our attitude to sex is changing and our expectations are changing. So we'll be talking more about those things. Thank you, Emily, and see you next time.